my perspective that we value your time. And I believe that the activity and the content that we have lined up for you today will be valuable. I do want to say that the most important aspect of today really is the activity that we're going to do, where you're going to get about an hour or more to work with your teams. It's tough to do that in your school centers, so many pressing priorities. So let's get right into the work. The district's SEL initiative, Social-Emotional Learning initiative, as leaders, we've identified 3 signature practices that I hope you're becoming familiar with. The SEL signature practices, this is one, right? So a welcoming ritual. So that's why we're doing these things. In the middle of today, then we have an engaging activity, and then we have an optimistic closure. I'm just saying that out loud, right? So as leaders, we start to model that and make it explicit so that people are connecting. With so much going on, it's really difficult to kind of stop. When I did this with the elementary principals and asked them to celebrate a success, they kind of looked at us with their mouths open, like, because you guys are so intense into the work. Diagnostics just came out. You've got graduations looming, state tests coming. So it's just feels like a little premature to maybe stop and celebrate. But what you're going to do is just take a minute, find a small success that you can celebrate so far this year, and share that with a colleague. Okay, I'll give you just a minute. Share a recent success. That's the thing, right? It ain't over.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share one at a table near me, a high school principal, a recent success, grade 10, ELA winter diagnostic, up 10 points. That's worth a shout out, right? So, and that's a result of all the little things that go into making that happen. So let me just kind of frame the afternoon for you. We've got about 3 hours. I hope to get you out of here at 3 o'clock, give you a half an hour back. The essentials training we've been doing for a number of years continues to kind of evolve. And as you know, we start with the accountability framework. And the last time we went over the cells, we went over acceleration and some other things. Today, here's our focus. The accountability system starts with the standards and the test, right? And today we're going to take a look at these assessments from a testing blueprint and breaking it into reporting categories, standards, and items. And then the activity that you're going to do with your team is really going to be taking a look at specific items. When we talk about valuing your time, right? If you're looking at a lot of data and just looking at standards, then you're not going to get the most out of your resources. Because when students are not scoring on a particular standard, then it could be for a lot of different reasons. And so we're going to kind of go through a process and model a process that many of you may already be doing, give you time to struggle with that within your team. and really make this part of a larger picture that I'll illustrate to you. But of course, it starts with our vision that every child reach their full potential. In order to do that, what we're going to talk to you about today is finding out what each child needs, right, in order to score. But that's just one part of reaching their potential. And the way that we do that is by providing world-class education with excellence and equity. The process that we're sharing with you today comes from a research base, but it's about really what are you doing with your school to have world-class systems in place, okay? So how do we create this world-class system? And it's really, this is our plan, right? Our 5-year strategic plan. We've identified these with input from the community, just like you would with your SAC, right? To say, what's our North Star? For high schools, it's a 90% graduation rate and this post-secondary readiness, and investing in those 4 themes. But I want to share with you today the first objective that's identified in our strategic plan. It's up here in theme 1. I've talked to you about it before, but it reads, to ensure a shared commitment and collective responsibility for the academic success of every child. So you as your team, just the leadership team, right? What do you all do to do that, right? Ensure a shared commitment and a collective responsibility. And then it goes down to the teachers, right? Not your kids, my class, their kids, the ELL kids, right? Our kids, right? What are the systems that we have in place to ensure that shared commitment and collective responsibility? That's culture, right? So we frame our work, your leadership, through this lens of culture, systems, and instruction. And the work that we'll do today, it doesn't land in one of these buckets. Most of the work that we do doesn't, right? It threads through all 3 of these. So when we start talking about breaking data down, finding point of error, reteaching, identifying student needs, that's one element that's part of systems. And within systems are made up of these different elements that require skill and commitment, right? And building up some muscle memory around that. And then when you're monitoring, are you monitoring for those things? That's part of the systems. And it's part of a culture of how we do the work, a culture of high expectations, right? But it's really part of instruction. And so when we talk about what we're going to talk about today, what we're doing is we're looking at it through this lens. It's your leadership in these 3 ways that kind of thread this together. So we hope to paint that picture for you today. This is what when we talk about our strategic plan, our North Star of graduation rate, we've celebrated this for just a minute, but I wanted to put this up because this is how we report on our strategic plan by gender and by race, ethnicity. These are our subgroups. And what you see for our female students is our Black, Hispanic, and our white students have all reached that milestone of 90% of the students graduating within 4 years. That's enormous. Let's give ourselves a hand. We've got some work to do with the guys, right? Only the white males are there now, right? Our Hispanic males are very close at 89%, and our Black males are the furthest away at about 86. But when you look out over time, you'll see over the last 5 years the work that you guys have been doing, right? And the graduation standards, you guys know this, are higher than they've ever been, man. You know, you've got community service requirements, a GPA requirement, state tests to pass. There's a lot here. If you just reflect back to when you were in high school, the bar wasn't this high. So with a higher bar than ever, right, we're really see some historic achievement, but still some significant work to do because our ELL and our ESE kids have made some really remarkable progress. But, right, thank you, Harvey. Yeah. Hurt his shoulder, clapping himself on the back over there. No. Yeah, that Harvey's biggest advocate for those kids, right? 33% increase over the last 5 years for our female ELL students. And that's an enormous challenge in itself. Kids coming in, right? English isn't your primary language and needing to pass that test and meet all those other requirements. It's a high bar in high school. And one of the things I'll point to as we look at the performance of our ESE students, right? Beyond any other subgroup, that group has the lowest achievement, okay? When we look at across a large percentage of our schools, right, about 40% of our schools struggle to educate our ESE students effectively. So that should be on all of our minds. And this is, when we talk about achievement, this is an enormous achievement. 20 of our high schools have reached our strategic plan long-term outcome of 90%. So let's give that a hand. And Palm Beach Lakes, Glade Central, Boynton, and Lake Worth, they're coming, right? We know that. There's a lot of good work being done there in the high 80s. And when you look over the last 10 years, the kind of double-digit gains that have been made at those schools is something to celebrate. So recently, we did our diagnostics, and you guys did the semester exams. But this is just review for those of you that may be new in the room, right? When we look at achievement, we take our achievement data and we compare it to standard, self, and others, right? So we put out this report called the three-way. It's a spreadsheet, and you're able then to compare it to a standard, right? And for some of you, that's a pretty high bar. It may not be the district because you're above the district average, right? But it could be the district average or the state average, or then we look at the comparison to self. How did you do compared to prior year, and then to others? You guys are very competitive. You're competing against each other. So that's pretty obvious, right? So you're looking at schools that are similar to you and seeing how they're doing. And then we also break it down by subject, grade level, teacher, and subgroup. We try to, whenever possible, give you that subgroup performance. So it's important to take a look at. So we're taking our data. We're starting with a very broad look, right, and looking at achievement. But to get to achievement, right, the devil is in the details, and we'll get to that. This is a report then, because sometimes it's important to compare the same kids. If I'm comparing this year's ninth graders to last year's ninth graders, right, those are two different groups of kids. So looking at the same group of kids, we do this in our matrix report, right, in EDW, and I'll just give you an illustration. So I pulled, this is a high school, right, and the way that we would read this report, I have a question. Students who scored level 2 on the FSA, how many of those kids scored 3 on the DIAG? So the way I've set this up, I've selected the winter diagnostic. So the rows represent winter diagnostic, and the columns represent FSA. So how many students scored 2 on 18 FSA and 3 on DIAG? What would the correct answer be? So if this is FSA, level 2, and this is 3 DIAG, right? The answer is 32. Okay, so that's how you read the report. I say that because I'm going to do a reveal here. This is one of our high schools. This is comparing FSA to diagnostic, and what I can see is there are 44 kids who had a level 3 on FSA that scored a level 2 or a level 1 on the winter diagnostic, right? There are 23 who were level 4 on FSA who are now level 3 on diagnostic, level 2 or level 1, and so forth. On the other side of this, we have kids, who went up achievement levels. But what's important is this comes with a list of kids, right? So what's important is I know and easily identify what's going on with those 44 kids, right? If they don't reach a level 3, not only are they going to fall out of my achievement, they got no shot at learning gains, right? So those are the kinds of things I think over years you all have built the capacity around. That's how you're looking at your data. If you're new and you're new to the room, that's how you should be looking at it, right? Every child is important. Every child reaches their full potential. But this is just, part of your strategy. And that's a report to help you with that. We also give you data that looks like this. These are level comparison graphs, so you can look by gender, by grade level, and by subgroup compared to the district, or compared to yourself, or compared to another school. Yes, ma'am.
So, Mark, on the slide prior, when they do the comparison, are they drawing student data from EDW and writing in order to do that comparison analysis?
Writing is not included in our diagnostic. Yep, fair enough. Okay, and then the other thing that we look at, even on the diagnostic then, are reporting categories, right? And we'll get a little more into that. And throughout this slide deck, let me just point out, there's probably about 85 slides in this deck. Fortunately for you, we're not going to present them all, right? A lot of the slides are hidden, but they're a resource for you when you go back to unpack, share with your team, take out the slides you don't need, use the slides you want, and everywhere possible, there are hyperlinks so that you don't have to do that work. And then we look at reporting categories. Even on Palm Beach Performance Assessment, we break it down by component. This is just another, the 0632, which kind of gives you a profile of strengths and weaknesses by grade level, by reporting category, and so forth. So, all right. So the next kind of phase of this is we're going to start drilling into the assessments, and I just have a couple of quick slides to update you on. On February 4th, I sent the principals an email, and I asked you to identify a couple of people on your team who were going to help you do accountability corrections. So each year, before the state calculates school grades, right, you get one last pass to look at your data to make sure that it's accurate before it goes to the state. My team does everything they can to match and clean and everything else. So the state's using a different method of giving you access to your data called single sign-on through the DOE. So that's why we need those names so we can set the accounts up. Secondly, as we get closer to FSA, then here are links to practice tests. This should not be new, right? But it's just linking you right to the resource. And obviously, the accommodated versions are linked there as well. Okay? And practice test for the EOCs. Now we'll kick over to the other tests. So each test that the state administers or designs, just like we do our diagnostics, in fact, we model after that, starts with a test design. If you're going to build a house, you've got a blueprint, right? And that's what this is. It's essentially a blueprint for the ELA test and each one of those assessments so that you know what's going to be assessed, how much, and so forth. And then item specifications, right? We understand the standards, right? But within an item, right, they have what they call content limits. They have item mode. So how do the students need to be prepared to be performed? You can get points if your kids are simply comfortable and understand the test, right? Don't let all that good teaching go to waste. This is what one of those test designs looks like, right? This is 910 ELA. They tell us ahead of the game, there's these themes called reporting categories that include this group of standards, and that'll represent 25 to 35% of the test. And so when we design our diagnostic test, we do it the same way, right? Those standards make up roughly 35% of the test. So if you see a particular reporting category and know it's worth more or fewer points, the other thing that's important on this slide is in the upper right-hand corner as you look at it, and that's that 80% of the FSA is at DOK2 or higher. So when you're in those rooms and you're looking at work, right, what level is the questioning? What's the dialogue in the room? Do students have to defend their answers? Do they have to explain the answers? How did you get that answer? Why is that the correct answer? Let them explain it. Let them explain it to one another, right? This is really critical. If a lot of the questioning and the responses, or if the teacher's doing most of the work, which happens in a lot of our classrooms, then the students aren't being pushed to DOK2 and higher. And as you know, it's pattern scoring. Those items count more, right? That kid that is kind of on the cusp of a 2 or 3, they get a DOK3 or a couple of DOK2 items right, because they're able to parse it and do the analysis on it like you're going to do today, makes the difference. Okay? And with that, Diana's going to start taking you in a little bit deeper.
All right, good afternoon. So we're going to focus in today and focus in the area of reteaching, because at this point of the year, your teachers and you're kind of focusing in on this double duty. There are still a lot of standards that just, quite frankly, haven't been taught yet. So we still need initial instruction on those standards. But at the same point, we know that there are some standards where our students haven't reached mastery, so we need to reteach those standards. But there isn't a lot of time yet left to do all of that. So how do we do it and maximize the time? So for those standards that were initially taught, but we know we need some reteaching, how do we do it and do it in a way that maximizes time? So that's where we're focusing today's activity on. So it's really looking in at point of error, focusing in on which part of the standard our students are struggling with and where are the resources for those particular pieces of the standard. But I want to take it from the reports that Mark showed to you. So the state provides our reports for us in reporting categories, and our Department of Research Evaluation Assessment does a great job doing the same thing, mimicking that same data. But when we talk to teachers, we focus in, as we should, on standards. We need to make that connection for teachers, which standards are in which reporting categories. For ELA, it's very simple. For whether it's grades 3 all the way to grade 10, same standards are in the same reporting categories, right? Key ideas and details is 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, always, right? The green above, that is a hyperlink that takes you directly into the reporting categories for each grade level, as well as how much you should see each part of the test is worth per reporting category. So if you hit that hyperlink in the PowerPoint, it takes you straight to that for both 9 and for 10. So you have that information there for your teachers. For mathematics, not quite as easy, right? Algebra and geometry, they're going to be different reporting categories. The courses are obviously very different standards. Algebra is there already split up for you. Again, at the top, the green is a hyperlink. It takes you directly into it, so you have the reporting categories split up. There's also the hidden slide for geometry, so if you want to share it with your teachers as a slide, all of the standards are already broken up as a slide, so you have it there as well. So that way, when you look at your reporting category data in all of those reports Mark showed you, and you see that you have a particular weakness in a category, helping your teachers kind of hone in on, well, then which standards are we weak in? This can help you hone in exactly on what does that mean for which standards. But here's the next part of that. My challenge or thought to our teachers, our thoughts to us, is I would challenge that our days of creating those secondary benchmark calendars are pretty far behind us. Where we look and go, you know, our kids are struggling with 1.3, so we need to reteach that. Those days are gone because our standards today are just so much more complex than that. So let's look at this ELA one. So this one is RL 1.2. Determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details, and provide an objective summary of the text. So we split it up into different colors for you so you can see all the different pieces. There are actually, if you break it up, 5 different key components or aspects that a student has to do for this one particular standard. First of all, they just need to be able to flat out determine the theme of the text. So A, know what a theme is, and then be able to determine it. It's not going to be directly stated. I also need to be able to determine the central idea of the same piece of text. Central idea and theme, not the same thing. And I have to be able to analyze the development of the theme over the course of the text, including how it emerges, how it first comes out in that text, and then transforms over the course of the text, or how it develops. And I have to be able to do the exact same thing with the central idea. The development of the central idea, again, not the same thing as theme, how it emerges, comes out, and develops over the course of the text. And then, hey, just for kicks, let's do an objective summary. So when we look at our data and we say, wow, our kids were really struggling with 1.2, well, which part? Was it the determining the theme part? Was it analyzing the development of the central idea over the course of the text part? Or was it the objective summary part? Or was it just flat out knowing the difference between a theme and a central idea? So if we say, oh, 1.2, slap that on a secondary benchmark calendar, your teachers could be reteaching the heart out of 1.2 and really doing really great work around it, asking high DOK questions. You walk in and you're like, this is a great question. DOK 3, yes, we're doing these great questions. But they're teaching these aspects of the standard, and the parts of the standards the kids aren't getting were these aspects. It just did you a whole lot of nothing. So it's really honing in on not just what is the standard, but which aspect of the standard are our students not getting. And obviously, it's not going to be the same answer for every kid. Different kids are going to have different answers. Today's activity, as Mark alluded to, is going to go into, well, how do we do that? Like, how do we know? So that's what we're going to practice and go over today, is really getting into how do we figure this out. Mathematics, exact same way. So here we have an Algebra 1 standard. Calculate and interpret the average rate of change of a function presented symbolically or as a table over a specified interval. And then estimate the rate of change from a graph. First, I have to be able to calculate the average rate of change of a function over a specified interval. Then I have to be able to interpret that rate of change. And then I also have to be able to estimate the rate of change just by interpreting a graph. So if I do all of my reteach work up here at calculating the average rate of change, which is where many of your math teachers are going to stay because it's simple algorithm, but yet where students were messing up was down here at estimating rate of change, higher complexity skill, you're not going to do very well when we reassess. And that's where sometimes teachers struggle. I've retaught my heart out, I reassessed, and they still got it wrong. It's which aspect of the standard are we reteaching? Science, although the standards are not written the same way, still have different skills. What I love about science is you can see how it moves from DOK 1 to 2 to 3. For this particular standard, the students have to just flat out need to be able to recognize the DNA code. They need to be able to explain the relationship between mutation and phenotypic change, and then have to be able to analyze those mutations. If my reteaching is just in recognizing code, but my reassess question is about analyzing mutations, we're not going to do well. Or vice versa. If all of my reteaching is down here at analyzing mutations, and all of my students, what they're missing is the basic concept of I'm just not recognizing the DNA code, I'm still not going to do very well. Figuring out that point of error, where are students messing up, so you can fix that need, because we just frankly don't have the time to start all over at the very beginning. We have to figure out what is the point we're messing up on and fix that point. This is a slide you've seen before. I know Mark's talked about it. I really want to emphasize it, especially as we're getting close to the writing. The writing matters. We're seeing it over and over and over again with the data. Students with the higher writing score are getting a better total ELA score even when they have a lower reading portion. And this is our district data. You received your school-specific data. It is in a Google Sheet inside of your Google Drive. If you cannot locate it, email me. I will be happy to resend it to you. But here's why. Here's why the information on that sheet is important, and here's what you can do with it. Okay, and here's why it matters to you right now. This graph on the right shows our district data, and it shows a trend. On average, it shows for us, students who score a 7 on the writing, on average, get a level 3 on the FSA. Average. That means there are some students that score a 7 and don't get up to a level 3. And that means there are some students that get a level 3 that didn't get up to a 7. That's why it's an average. Okay. But when we get to individual schools, it doesn't always work that way. So we see some individual schools that have really high reading scores, and as a result, even with a 6, their students are getting up to a level 3, which means there are a lot of writing points and a lot of learning gains left right there on the table. If that's you, you want to grab them up. Also, this is really important because on that Google Sheet, on the second tab, you will have a list of how many zeros you had in your school. You care about that because those zeros are some quick possible learning gains. If you move a 0 in writing up to a 4 or 5, which frankly isn't a very good writing score, you can make some nice movement there. And a 0 in writing is a 0 because the kid wrote straight up in a foreign language. And if a kid wrote in a foreign language last year because it was his new English language learner, he's acquired a lot of English his first year. Or the student completely plagiarized. Work with the student so he understands the difference and doesn't plagiarize again. Or it was blank paper, which is a motivation issue. You want to address those concepts. You also see who your 1s are. The only way mathematically to get a 1 is to get a 1 because you wrote off topic and you scored a 1 for your conventions. There is no other way mathematically to score a 1 on the writing. It's the only possible way. You wrote off topic and you got a 1 on your conventions. So if you have 1s on your campus, you know they wrote off topic last year. It was the only way you can get a 1. Address that. It's an easy fix.
Diana, do you mind if I go back a slide? So can I just, if you have not seen this slide before, or if you don't quite remember this slide before, I just want to dial in for just a moment, right? I'm going to show you the purpose of this slide is to illustrate that students who got the same raw score, right? This is, the raw score. So these kids got, that's their raw score, right? They got the same number % correct, right? But then there's a distinction between kids that got the same raw score. Some got a level 2 and some got a level 3. And it comes down to writing in those cases. So when we talk about that being a higher DOK, being worth more, right? You have kids who have the same raw score. That's what each one of these boxes are. They got the same raw score and varied anywhere from a level 2 to a level 4. Same raw score. The difference between a level 1 and a level 2, or a 1 and a 2, or a learning gain, a sub-level, right? And so the difference is that 5 years ago, as the principal, you weren't the instructional leader on your campus, right? That has shifted in the last 5 years. You built the master board, right? You ran the business of your school. You hired teachers. Now, not only do you have to know this, right? Your challenge is not just to know that, right? But know how to get a kid from a 6 to a 6.6, right? That's the incredible challenge for everybody at your table right now. And so we're building, I'm going to tell you, the level of discourse and conversation that we see with instructional leadership teams over the last 3 years has evolved tremendously. You guys are talking and walking this stuff, right? But that's what the point of today is, right? Go deeper, right? Build more muscle, build more capacity. So when you're going through, the difference is now you've got to coach this stuff. Who's coaching? The teachers. Your reading coach, your math coach, right? Do you know that's what they're doing, right? So I'm sorry, just grab it for just a minute, but I just, before we go blazing by here, that's what this point is illustrating. Some of those things, those small points we're making are illustrated in the data, okay? And so it's important that you have somebody on your campus that knows writing, that knows your writing data, and that knows writing instruction. And that's why we're saying when you're in classes and you're having kids defend answers, are they discussing? Are they writing? Right? Because this is where it happens. And it begins to show up, right? That they can back up an answer or find evidence and do those things. Okay? Thanks.
You have this one right here. Like I said, that's the Google. It's a Google sheet that's in your Google Drive. If you now search in your Google Drive, it's organized in your Google Drive. Just search for your school number. It should be the very first one that pops up. If you can't find it, just email me. I am happy to resend it to you. Okay? All right, we are going to break into our activity. We're actually going to dive deep into it because we've been talking about, let's look at some standards, let's look at some questions. So let's actually spend some time doing that. In order to do that, though, we're going to move around the room. So both Mark and I are going to go back and forth with exactly how we're going to do it. But we're going to ask you, and we sent an email out to ask you to look at two particular and make a selection off two particular diagnostics, either the grade 9 ELA or the grade 10 ELA diagnostic. And we ask you that for a particular reason. Although I know that some of you may feel like, my biggest area of weakness is algebra, or perhaps it's biology, whichever piece. The semester exams are just a different beast. As many of you know, because high school, there is nothing more competitive than class rank and val sal in a high school. So those semester exams are tied to grades, which is tied to class rank and val sal, which means we keep those incredibly secure. We can't just email links out to those particular assessments. So we're going to talk about how we're going to deal with analyzing those in a few minutes, but for this particular activity, we're either going to focus on grade 9 ELA or grade 10 ELA. All right, so we are going to take, in order to move, we're going to take a few minutes of a break in order to move. On this half of the room, from this table here, this way, we're going to work on grade 9 ELA. So if you're saying grade 9 ELA was where I wanted to work, you're from this row here, this way. If you're like, nope, grade 10 ELA, I wanted to work on grade 10 ELA, you're from these two tables this way. We are going to, once we're going to take a break, we're going to reconvene at 9:50. I'm really tired, clearly. I'm sorry, at 12:55. 12:55. 10th grade, 9th grade. Go ahead and take a break.
You have a 10-minute break.